Good morning. My name is Dorothy Huddleston, and welcome to Learn How to Process and Maximize Your Paycheck Protection Program Loan Forgiveness. And thank you for being with us this morning. I'm super excited to have UHY, and we have here today Harold Moon. And I'm super excited that back in April of this year, as we experienced the COVID-19, UHY was gracious to present to us a series of webinars, and these webinars was a part 1 and 2, and the webinars consisted of various programs available to support your business, eligibility requirements, pros and cons to involvement in each program, documents you will need to have available to apply. Then we had a brief discussion of application process, a loans amount, discussion of loan amount. We had a discussion on bank underwriting process, recommendations of one first step once the loan is funded to you. We also had a discussion of where to maintain your money and how to document that money, payroll costs, benefit costs, occupancy costs, things of that nature. So I'm super excited that UHY is here with us today. And the presenter for this morning is Harold Moon. Harold is a managing director for the Mid-Atlantic region. Harold has over 30 years of experience providing audit, tax, financial, consulting expertise to a wide range of clients. So I'm super excited to have Harold with us this morning. But before I turn it over to Harold, I just want to give you some housekeeping. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, please make sure that you use the question box down below. And with all that being said, help me to welcome Harold to the platform. Good morning, Harold.
Thanks, Dorothy. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this today. I know that we as a company have done a lot of these throughout this whole year as things constantly change. And when we get to the end, we'll talk about a little bit about what is coming still. I actually just had an update on that this morning with a group, just trying to understand what the legislature is thinking and what could possibly be on the horizon in the next few weeks. So just to remind you, like Dorothy said, just as we're going through the slides, if you have specific questions, put them in the question box, and I will try to answer them as we go along. Okay, so these are going to be the things we talk about today. We're going to focus on the forgiveness of the loan. I mean, that's what everyone anticipated at the beginning when they got these loans. If you sat in one of our other webinars, we talk about the documents you needed. We'll talk a little bit about that today. But one thing to keep in mind is as you submit your forgiveness applications, you have to approach it as we as CPAs would in dealing with the IRS or an IRS agent. We have to try to provide documentation that backs up all the numbers that we will put on the forgiveness application. So we'll go through today, we'll go through the calculation of forgiveness, salary reduction, that's going to reduce your forgiveness, reduction in full-time equivalents, and that's going to reduce forgiveness, although there are some exceptions to that. Some of the safe harbors, the timing for filing. I have a lot of those conversations with my clients currently as to whether we should submit the application now or if we should wait. Which form to use. There's 2 different application forms, and then like we had mentioned, the supporting documentations, that the documents you're going to want to give to the bank when you submit your application. So in calculating forgiveness, you have to understand that your forgiveness, of course, is going to be limited by how much of a loan you got at the beginning. And then you're going to keep track of your allowed expenses during what's called the covered period. And the covered period is basically, if you remember, they originally came out and said it would be the 8-week period after you got the loan. They later expanded that to 24 weeks. So now actually you can choose in essence, you can choose any covered period between the 8 and the 24 weeks. The items that are help get forgiven are payroll costs or allowed costs. Payroll costs, the non-payroll costs are rent, and there's some specific limitations related to rent to a related party, utilities, interest payments, and basically your payroll needs to meet 60% of your loan proceeds. So you need to expend at least 60% of the money you received on your payroll costs. So 40% can be spent on other costs. So on the payroll costs, one of the things that you're going to do is it's going to cover payroll costs for all your people to keep them on your payroll. I mean, that's what the purpose of this was when it started. And it's going to be for this cover period that we talked about, either the 8 or the 24 weeks. And they're only going to pay, you should have only gotten money up to $100,000 per employee. So there are caps for non-owners that are, you can't pay them more than $46,153. That's the maximum that's going to be eligible for forgiveness during the cover period. If it's 24 weeks, if it's 8 weeks, then the amount is $15,385. And if you're filing in between, it's going to be prorated between those numbers. So make sure that you got your group health insurance, dental and vision. You can't prepay expenses. So I know when this first came out, businesses sometimes will make their corporate contribution to the retirement plan subsequent for 2019 and 2020. Those are not going to be allowed as part of this process. And then there's some additional limitations on those folks that are owners of a C corporation or an S corporation. And an owner is defined by anyone who owns more than 5%. So what that means is that if you are an owner and you own more than 5%, your cap on how much qualifies for forgiveness is going to be different than what it is for your employees. And then for those folks that are self-employed, the limit is going to be based on a calculation of their 2019 Schedule C, also capped at the the $15,385 for 8 weeks. And then there's some special rules related to partnerships and those types of things. So that's the payroll piece of it. You're going to calculate all those costs. And if you listen to some of our previous webinars, we talked about putting the proceeds in a separate bank account. And then as you expend the funds, doing a calculation like this for each pay period, and then reimbursing the checking account out of the loan proceed account. So then you should have all that documentation for exactly what the money was spent on. So if you've expended your full amount of proceeds on your allowable costs, and I've had a lot of clients that because they expanded the period from 8 weeks to 24 weeks, I have a number of clients that spent all their money on payroll because now it went so far down the road, 24 weeks. You have to look at some factors that may reduce your forgiveness amount. Okay. So if you as the employer reduce the salaries by more than 25%, you're going to get your forgiveness amount reduced. If you have less full-time equivalents during your cover period as compared to what we'll call the measurement date, then you're also going to have your forgiveness reduced. And the two measurement dates you can choose is you can either choose February 15th, 2019 through June 30, 2019, and you're going to figure out what your average full-time equivalents were, or it'll be your average full-time equivalents basically for January and February of 2020. So that's going to be kind of your starting point of what you're going to be compared to during the cover period. So one of the things we just talked about was the salary and wage reduction. So if you reduce the wages in excess of 25%, then that amount is going to reduce your forgiveness amount. And so if you look at the example that there is on that slide, if you're using a 24-week period, and you have and the borrower reduced the full-time employee's salary from $1,000 per week to $700 per week during the cover period, the employee, and the employee continued to work full-time, so they were a full-time equivalent of one, you're going to have a $300 or 30% reduction in compensation, right? So the first $250 doesn't impact your loan forgiveness, but the other $50 a week is going to reduce your loan forgiveness. So you're going to take that $50, times it out by the 24-week cover period. So you're going to end up reducing your forgiveness by $1,200. So you're going to have to provide a lot of those types of calculations. If you have lots of employees, it can get pretty complicated. We've helped clients get these calculations together in order to submit them to the bank, because they have to be able to understand how you came up with your forgiveness number. Okay, when you look at the full-time equivalent calculation, again, there are kind of like two options, right? You can go based on 40 hours a week. So if you have an employee that on a regular basis works more than 40 hours a week, you would cap it at 40 hours a week. But those people that were part-time would be based on the number of hours that they worked each week. Okay, so you're going to either calculate your average full-time equivalent that way, or there's a simplified method that they allow you to use, which is basically every full-time employee gets assigned a 1, every part-time employee gets assigned a 0.5 rather than the number of hours they work in a week. But whatever methodology you use, it has to be consistently applied. So it needs to be applied the same way for those original measurement periods that we talked about, which would have been, up to June of 19 or January, February of 2020. You need to use the same methodology for calculating that as you do for your cover period. So there are a few exceptions to full-time equivalent reductions. So there's a couple, there's some safe harbor. So we will talk about those next. So one of the things that you will not kind of get penalized for is what's called the rehire exception, right? So if you had laid someone off and you got your PPP money and you wanted to bring them back and they chose not to come back, you're not going to be penalized in your forgiveness calculation for that. The issues with that is that, the offer has to be in writing, and you must have notified the unemployment agency in your state about that. And so if you're going to be using that exception, then we need to make sure that we have documentation to back that up as to why that person qualified for that exception. The other exception is that if you're accepted from a reduction if you reduce the hours of an employee and then offered to restore the hours once you got your PPP money, but the employee declined to do so. As long as you made a good faith effort, it was written, and the offer was for the same salary as wages and the same number of hours before. So if you offered someone their job back and they chose not to come back, you won't be penalized in that case either. Or the third exception is if they ended up being fired for cause or voluntarily resigns. We've had a number of clients where maybe the folks were laid off originally, but when they wanted to bring them back, they had already found another job or something like that. So you're not going to be penalized in those cases. So there are some other safe harbors that you have that you won't be penalized for also. So for instance, I think the easiest example to use, excuse me, is if you were a restaurant. So in our state, in Maryland, restaurants could only do carry out. They couldn't have dining in. They were not allowed to be open fully. So if you had to, in order to comply with the requirements established by a governmental entity, and you could not reopen, then you're not gonna be penalized for that in the calculation. But again, you're going to have to provide documentation in your application for the state that you are in, and like in our state of Maryland, the governor would put out executive orders, so we would have to include his executive order as documentation for this exception. And then there's a few other safe harbors. The forgiveness won't apply if you meet if the reduction in full-time or salary between February 15th and April and rehire employees restored its full-time count to the same level that was in place in February of 2020, and you restore the salaries to the same as they were in place in February 15, 2020. And you just need to meet those requirements as of December 31st or at the application submission date to show that you met that safe harbor. So you would not have any forgiveness reduction in that case. So the timing of filing your application, we've had lots of conversations with our clients about this, is you have to file within 10 months after the end of your cover period. You have to have your application sent in. I know in our case here locally, we actually have a number of financial institutions that still are not accepting applications. They're only accepting maybe the simple application or for smaller ones. And then once the bank receives it, they have 60 days to act on the application. And then the SBA has another 90 days in which to act. So these are some of the things that are impacting the timing, right? So is the lender, like we just talked about, accepting the application? Have you spent all your money? You want to make sure you spend all the money in the cover period, the 24 weeks, in order to file the forgiveness application. And then some other things that you have to kind of consider is, are you trying to sell the business? That may have some implications on the timing. You have to make sure you understand that there's tax issues associated with these PPP funds, that if you get the loan forgiven, then the expenses that you made for that with that money is not deductible for tax purposes. So, one of the things that is being considered currently in the legislation is to overrule that so that the expenses that you paid with these funds will be tax deductible. And then, is the loan under a certain threshold for simplified forgiveness? Right now it's $50,000, but they're talking about changing that people that get under 150 will automatically be forgiven. We'll have to see if that gets passed in the new legislation. And then, do you have other implications as far as full-time equivalent reductions, right? Because you want to make sure you meet that full-time equivalence test when you, at the end of your cover period. So you may want to accelerate filing that application, because I believe then at that point in time, going forward, you're allowed to make your business operating decisions as you wish. And then, does the borrower want to get the this money, this debt off the books. There may be other loans that they have, and there may be loan covenants related to those other loans that this may impact. So you have to look at the full financial picture in order to make sure that you're doing the right thing for your business. Let me go back. So the application, there's two applications. There's a 3508 EZ that's available. This is for very small. You have to certify that you meet certain requirements as far as the full-time and equivalents and so forth. So this is for self-employed, independent contractors, sole proprietors that had no employees, and you, of course, had no change in wages or headcount. And then the regular form is the 3508, and that's all the details that we talked about as we went through this. You have to do your calculation of your full-time equivalents to make sure you have no reduction for that, and your salary reduction. So as we talked about a little earlier, the documentation you have to provide is all the calculations you did and all the supporting documentation that you used in order to calculate your loan forgiveness amount. The other thing that I've noticed in some of our clients with some of the financial institutions, they've been actually requesting a lot of the payroll return documents for expenses, any kind of reports you have related to full-time equivalents, and then all the supporting documents as far as invoices for health insurance, supporting documents for retirement contributions made, and then proof of that payment. So if you had set this money up in a separate bank account, and as you were paying out these amounts, let's say out of your checking account, and you reimburse the checking account, you in essence should have some document to support every withdrawal out of your PPP proceeds account.
Hello, Harold.
Yes.
Hello, Harold. I do have one question in queue.
Sure.
When do you anticipate this legislation going through?
That is a great question. I don't think any of us know that. I know in my update that I had this morning, they felt pretty confident that whatever's going to get passed will get passed in the next week, because I believe it's within about a week. I think Congress goes home for the holidays, and I believe the intent is that if something's going to get passed, it's probably going to happen in the next week. So.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Yep, no problem. Then back to, make sure you have the lease agreements and copies of proof of payment, canceled checks, anything like that. Utility bills, you'll want to have copies of the bills, canceled checks or ACH. Typically I would just send in all your bank. If you put it in a separate account, I would just send all the bank statements along with all the documents proving that what you spent the money on. So, as we just talked a little bit about this legislation that they're proposing, and along the way, this fall, there's been talk of a lot of different things. So there was, in the update we had this morning, there was talk of having a second round of PPP loans. I think they're going to try to target that to specific industries and specific businesses. The talk is less than 200 employees. There's talk of that it may not be allowed for as much money. There's talks of lots of different things related to a second round of PPP loans. So we're just going to have to wait and see as they get closer and what ends up happening. They've talked about expanding the uses of what it can be used for. Don't know if that's going to happen. And then they, talking about moving the safe harbor of having your full-time equivalents back from December 31 of this year to September of of next year. Let's see, I'm trying to see if I can pull up my notes from this morning. There were some things that didn't make it to the slide on here.
While you're pulling up your notes,
Yep,
I have
yep.
another question.
Sure.
Self-employed firms, form number 3508EZ. Please
Yep.
discuss this in more detail.
Discussed it in more detail.
Yes, please.
I mean, it's a different form, and all you have to do is certify a lot of things. Let's go back to that slide. Right, so you just have to certify that you had no reduction in wages and head count, and it's basically for smaller, simpler entities, right? The self-employed who does it on a Schedule C, who maybe they would, you know, maybe have just either 0 or 1 or 2 employees, so it can qualify that way. So it's just simplified that it's not going to make you go through all those full-time equivalent calculations like we talked about. So it's more of an application that, let's put it this way, the full-time equivalent thing and the salary, if you have any number of employees, you're probably going to need to get help with that. Your accountant, your CPA, your accounting department at your company maybe would fill that out. But the 3508EZ is really for the simple sole proprietor. I hope that helps.
Okay, I have one more question for you.
Sure.
Support for health insurance was just mentioned, but what about, let me go back, it went back to the screen. Just a second here. 10 months to, what about 10 months to apply for forgiveness? Is it 10 month after covered period or 10 month after the loan given?
No, it's 10 months after the end of the cover period. So if you spent all your money by, let's say, September of 2020, you would have 10 months from that point in time in order to apply for forgiveness.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, so it's not from when you get the money originally. So they've been talking about allowing the simplified loan forgiveness for larger loans up to 150,000. They've been talking, like we talked about expanding what it can be used for. They're definitely talking about making the expenses that you pay with the money tax deductible, which is not what the IRS wants currently. So there are a lot of ideas that are being kind of kicked around. So they're talking about, in addition to having below 200 or 300 employees, you're going to also have to show, now that we've been in this pandemic for a while, that you had at least a 30% loss in revenue in a quarter. That's going to be, I think, a new requirement in the second round of loans. And then they're talking about expanding it to different types of organizations. So in the past, they had it for tax exempt organizations, 501c3s, but they did not include it for 50c6s, which is chambers of commerce and those types of organizations. And they're talking about expanding it to those organizations with this second round of PPP money. Let's see. Yeah, I think we covered everything kind of on this slide as far as what they're talking about doing. Yeah, but it's very much in flux until they get something in front of someone to vote on officially. We try to keep up to date on it, but it's very difficult sometimes. So let me go back. Let's see. Yeah, so I think that was my last slide, was this one here. So if you have any other questions, I'm happy to help. You know, if you have specific questions, you can email me, contact Dorothy. She can get in touch with me, and we're happy to help in whatever way we can.
I do have a few questions. So the next question, I received the loan in July and have hired new employees. Since
Mhm.
then, when do I have to file?
So you're going to file the start of your 10-month time frame is, you know, so if you got your money in July and you basically, you know, that would be the start of your cover period. And then you could pick 8 or 24 weeks after that. So if it's 24 weeks and you hire people and once you've expended all those funds and in 24 weeks, either 24 weeks or less, that's when you can apply for forgiveness. And that's when you need to do your full-time equivalent test. So when you can apply for forgiveness, so I'll see if I can do the math in my head, right? So if it's July and you got it at the end of July and you got August, September, is 8 weeks. So if you get through September and you've expended all your funds in those 8 weeks, and you could apply then your time clock starts at the end of September. So you would have 10 months from that point in time in order to apply for forgiveness.
Okay, thank you. What are the amounts of loans for self-employed firms?
What are the amount of the loans? I mean, when you applied for your PPP loan, they should have had you do a calculation that would have basically been because the loan was supposed to be 2.5 times your average monthly payroll in 2019. So, so if you're a sole proprietor and you had a Schedule C and you made your net on your Schedule C was $120,000, you would divide that by 12, which would give you your monthly amount. So you would basically, your average wage was 10,000 a month times 2.5 times, so you would qualify for a $25,000 loan. So that was kind of the basics of the math when they were doing the loan applications earlier this year. Currently, you can't apply for a PPP loan until they approve a second round. The PPP program ended in August.
Okay, thank you. Next question, can I apply early?
My guess is no. I don't know of any banks that will take any kind of application for this next round until it's probably been approved by Congress. So I'm not aware of any banks that would allow you to apply now for it. Actually, yesterday I had a call from a client who actually tried to do that. I wasn't sure what bank he went to, but they wouldn't take his application because it hasn't been approved and there's no process to take that application. Because when they pass this second round, they could change the requirements and change the application form if it's required. So we're just going to have to wait until they approve it.
Thank you.
Mhm.
What are the calculation for getting the PPP amount changed for the second round?
I'm not sure what you mean by getting it changed for the second round. I mean, in this second round, I'm guessing that the calculation for the loan proceeds may be something different than it was for the first round. It may still be the same, but it would be, if they're just going to do a second round of loans with the same requirements, it's still going to be that 2.5 times your average wages in 2019. But until they pass it, we don't really know that for sure.
Okay, thank you. Can the 1099 payments be used for calculating payroll?
No, 1099, if you pay people on a 1099 miscellaneous basis, that does not qualify as payroll for your business. Those people could apply because those 1099s means that they're self-employed, they could apply for themselves, but you would not be able to apply as the business and count their 1099 wages as compensation.
Okay, thank you. Now, this
Mhm.
question is in regards to a previous question. It says, can I apply early for the forgiveness application now on the previous loan? So I know she said, can you apply early? But she meant to say, can I apply early for the forgiveness application now on the previous loan?
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, you can apply for forgiveness on the previous loan as soon as you've expended those funds, as long as it was more than 8 weeks. You could, once you've gotten to that point, you can, and your bank is taking forgiveness applications, you could apply for forgiveness at that point in time. So yes, now I don't know if you would consider that early or not early, but you're not allowed to apply during the cover period when you're expending the funds. You've got to wait to those funds have been expended and then apply. And if you think about it, it's because you have to expended those funds because you're going to provide them documentation to prove what you spent that money on.
Okay, thank you. One other question. If I do not spend all of the funds, do I have to return it?
That is a great question. I don't know that I've had any clients who haven't expended all the funds. I know at the beginning we were talking about situations where that may happen, but I don't know if technically I know the answer to that. I
Okay,
would
thank you.
think, yeah.
Okay. So there look like there aren't any other questions in
Okay.
queue. Do you have any last words or parting words before I close out?
I don't believe I have any. I want to thank you for allowing me to come today and talk about it. And hopefully, if you have other questions, feel free to reach out and be glad to help in whatever way we can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Harold, for being with us this morning to talk to us in regards to learn how to process and maximize your Paycheck Protection Program loan for forgiveness. So I just want to let you know this webinar will be on our website, and the presentation will be available to you as well. And also, before we close out, just like to let you know that if you have not been to minoritysupplier.org website, we do have some great opportunities for you for the holiday. If you're looking to purchase items for your friends and loved ones, we do have the holiday market. Please go there and support our minority businesses with their products and services. So if you would like to give someone something different and unique, please go to our marketplace that is on www.minoritysupplier.org. And again, thank you so much for tuning in with us today. And I'm assuming that you will probably be back with us in the near future, Harold?
Yes, if it isn't me, it will be someone from UHY. I'm sure we're
Yes.
happy to help.
Yes, because there's always something new that's coming up, some
Yep.
updates and things of that nature. So
No
again,
doubt.
thank you so much for
All
our
right.
guests for tuning in with us. And Harold, thank you so much for being with us as well. And we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Have a great day and have a happy holidays.
Thanks.